Hello everyone, welcome to yours and my favorite part of the week. That's right, it is your online adolescent psychology course, and I'm here to walk you through the hottest topics in peer groups. So let's jump into it. Beginning with the origins of peer groups. Peer groups can be defined as groups of individuals of approximately the same age. Educators first developed the idea of free public education when students grouped by age in the mid-19th century. And I should say that that is in the United States. Age grading, the process of grouping individuals within social institutions on the basis of age. This, however, is not universal. Adolescent peer groups based on friendship formed in school were not prevalent until well into the 20th century. So, as I mentioned before, and I give that whole breakdown of industrialization in previous chapters, and as I will continue to stress throughout this entire class, probably more so than all of your most psychology classes combined, structure matters. Our economic structure, our historical period matters. So in this case here, the formation of public education contributed to the emergence of these adolescent peer groups. And in fact, even though public education did increase, or I should say the idea of public education really developing in the US in that mid-19th century, it really wasn't until almost the mid-1900s, 1930s, around there, wherein kind of even just going to elementary school and middle school became more of a universal phenomenon and not just a place for kind of wealthy children of wealthy adults. And one fundamental aspect or structural aspect of this is this age grading process, wherein we basically group students or children in kind of within a particular age range into similar classrooms. Thus, their typical peer or peer group will be people of the same age, because most of their socialization outside of the household, outside the immediate community, within a school setting, is going to be among peers, classmates of the same age. We also see changes in the overall population of the adolescent group. The teenage population grew rapidly between the 1950s and the 1970s, then turned downward a little bit. This is known as the baby boom generation, the period following World War II, during which the number of infants born was extremely large. The number of 15 to 19-year-olds doubled between this period of time. Approximately 13% of U.S. Americans are between the ages of 10 and 19 today. Changes in the number of adolescents may warrant changes in the allocation of funds for social services, educational programs, and healthcare. To the extent this is actually done, it is important to track. Changes in the size of the adolescent population have implications for understanding the behavior of cohorts, a group of individuals born during a particular period. You are born into specific domestic and world, political, social, and economic circumstances in a given historical period. So, as I stated here, we have this boom of the baby boom. It's pretty self-explanatory. There are a lot of babies, which drastically kind of shifts kind of the overall population of the United States during this period. And one reason why researchers keep track of this, as I stated before, is theoretically we can allocate resources and create programs that address the needs of adolescents. So, I mean, obviously, I'm going to go with insufficient. But even some things like free lunch, free breakfast, those kind of things are relatively new in the United States. Social programs based around the fact that many children are hungry and adolescents, as well. And then I just want to touch on this cohort point. So cohorts, you can understand, or cohort effect, is that, as I stated, you all grow up, we all do, every single person ever in the history of mankind and forever will grow up in a specific moment in history, wherein there are certain social values, but not just certain social values and attitudes, but certain economic structures, certain political events that are going on. And those define, or shape, I should say, who we are as a person. So again, if you're born in 1900 and you're a starving adolescent, guess what? You're not going to have free school lunch because, one, there's not really universal free public education, and also there are way less social welfare programs. But kind of you can think of other ways as well. So kind of people below, I don't know, around 35 years of age, something around that, maybe below 40 years of age, they grew up like online. They have many more years of experience interacting online, working with specific technologies related to computers and stuff like this, versus like an 80-year-old right now. Sure, they can still use computers and be completely fine, whatever, but kind of the idea here is that people below 40 years old, people below 35 years old grew up as computers, internet, all these things as just kind of things that exist. We don't really think through, oh, this is a relatively new invention. Oh, how are other people older than me dealing with this? We don't really think in those terms. We just think, oh, this has always existed. But that's not the case. So anyway, so that access to that technology can influence, how you communicate, your skills that you develop in the real world, and your understanding of the world, because again, you're interacting with different, in different kind of social moments, political moments, economic moments that again shape who you are. And those are cohort effects. This is not tested on, but there are differences in the percentage of, or the proportion of adolescents in various countries, with some countries seeing a large increase in their average citizens' age, in some countries seeing a decline, or at least being much younger. So typically kind of African countries being among the lowest average age, while some countries like Japan, for example, having the lowest or among the lowest amount of adolescents within their population. Why peer groups are necessary today, or at least formed. In less industrialized societies, it is expected that that adult behaviors depends on the family. People from different families are often expected to live by very different expectations and regulations. Socialization of adolescence is accomplished in family/community groups. So a few points here, as stated, socialization really occurring at a community family level, partly due to that kind of that intergenerational continuation of occupation. So whatever, your parent was a farmer, your great-grandparent was a farmer, you're probably going to be a farmer. So it's kind of, so that socialization process is partly because you're kind of being trained as the next generation of farmer in that case, but there's obviously other kind of careers and, kind of historic kind of family obligations and labor practices. And kind of theoretically here, maybe your family member is a highly influential member of this community or whatever, and thus you're born into that highly influential family, and that kind of dictates kind of your social circumstances, your resources, maybe the specific occupations you take. So maybe a lot more variability within the family, but across families, I should say, within a community, but also at the same time, again, kind of socialization, really kind of being that hands-on community, family-oriented approach. Now, granted, as we all understand, the who your family is also plays a big role in kind of the social resources you have, and ultimately kind of the type of occupation you have as well, and even in more industrialized countries. But here, theoretically, it's a little more formal, wherein like, oh, I was the family of a leader of, I'm just making up something, some kind of tribe or a community or something. Therefore, now my son is going to be kind of the next leader, or my daughter, or whatever, something along those lines. Moving on to industrialized societies, all individuals are expected to learn the same set of norms. Theoretically, rules governing behavior apply equally to all members of the community. Socialization of adolescence is not limited to the family. Society has universal norms for many activities. Need for universal school-based education created age-segregated peer groups. Teaching is better done in schools to ensure everyone achieves the same base level of social and material knowledge. So kind of now we move out of kind of maybe the family unit a little bit, and now we have rules that theoretically govern us all that apply to all of us. To the extent that they actually do, no, but kind of, yes, obviously, that's not exactly true, but kind of, abstractly, that is the case. But as we talked about before, with this kind of industrialization and kind of maybe a universal kind of set of norms or, ascribed to, the idea is that, okay, so we need some kind of standardized approach to educate people on norms and kind of just like education. So like a common like little critique is like, oh, what do I have to learn this thing? I'm never going to use this thing in life. Well, like part of the reason is like, well, we need to have like a society. So we got to have everybody in society have a certain base level of knowledge to be able to operate in a kind of a very complex world. It would not be great if like some members of society have like a first grade math education level. Now, granted, obviously, within the U.S., there are a ton of structural issues that create many people to drop out of high school, or contribute to, I should say, people dropping out of high school and having very low like math and reading and writing kind of abilities. But kind of theoretically, the idea here is, hey, we live in a very complex society. You gotta have baseline knowledge of all these certain kind of skills in order to be like functional and have a society that can like survive, frankly, and theoretically thrive. Because if you have half your population not being able to read, it's like, oh, that's not going to be a way that you can. Or I should say, that's really not a sustainable model as a country, because you need people to read, because there are a lot of complex jobs that require reading. And whatever, having increased education increases also like, whatever, inventions, and also theoretically pro-social behavior and a greater understanding of each other, kind of in an ideal world. Margaret Mead, who's an anthropologist. Margaret, if you're if you're watching right now, please let me know if I mispronounced your last name. Sound off in the chat. But Mead argued that the best way to socialize adolescence for adulthood depends on the speed of society's changes. In post-figurative cultures, this is defined as cultures in which the socialization of young people is done primarily by adults. The way in which older generations lived will be very similar to the ways subsequent generations will live. Historically, this is the most common type of culture. Contemporary societies have shifted away from post-figurative cultures. What is co-figurative cultures? These are cultures in which young people are socialized both by adults and by each other. Prefigurative cultures? Cultures in which society is changing so quickly that adults are frequently socialized by young people. Questions just from why the child can't multiply to why can't my grandparents figure out how to use the calculator app on the Note 20. So kind of to break this down here, we have this post-figurative idea, and this is a theory again by Mead here, anthropologist. So we have this post-figurative cultures, wherein, again, it's kind of intergenerational expectations. We understand, boom, you're going to be a farmer. I was a locksmith. You're going to be a locksmith. It's kind of like these kind of things are stable across time. Thus, the knowledge that adults have are going to be incredibly super useful for next generation farmer, locksmith, etc. But kind of, again, industrialization, globalization, we kind of see shifts in this. Looking at specifically first, co-figurative culture, wherein now adults and children are socializing each other, teaching each other. So it's not just adults teaching children how to, whatever, drive or order fast food, whatever, operate an ATM, all these kind of things that people do, but also now adolescents are socializing their parents as well. So it's kind of like bi-directional. They're both kind of socializing each other. So whatever, your parent is like, oh, what is this TikTok thing? Hey, can you give me your FYP? And then you're like, no, it doesn't work like that. It's an algorithm, whatever. So like you're teaching each other theoretically in kind of a more bi-directional model. First is this prefigurative culture. It's like at this point now, culture is kind of broadly stated, but like technology and all these other things are shifting so rapidly that adults, like, they can't keep up. So then it's just like pure young people have to socialize the older adult or even just middle-aged adult, whatever. So whatever, you can imagine like an 80-year-old who's like, oh, for whatever reason they bought the Note 20 or whatever the newest Note is, and they're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And at that point, it's just like the adolescent is basically acting as the primary teacher. So kind of we have three approaches. One, adult to child, then we have bidirectional, and then we have child to, basically purely child to adult. So like set up my BeReal account or something. Now I'm not going to re-record these videos for like 2 years or so. So we'll see if BeReal still exists then. It seems like something that's going to die. I don't know, it seems kind of like a garbage app, but we'll see what happens. In what ways have adolescent groups changed? There is a sharp increase during adolescence in the amount of time individuals spend with peers. Over 15% of time U.S. American adolescents spend with peers, while only 15% of the time with their parents. And yes, that's the magic of television, fixing that typo. Peer groups function much more often without adult supervision than they do during childhood. They're more mobile and they seek independence. Granted, there's some cultural variation there. During adolescence, increasingly more contact with peers is between males and females. Boys' time is primarily replaced with time spent alone. Girls replace time alone with friends. Children's peer relationships are limited mainly to small groups. Adolescents spend more time with larger collectives of peers, known as crowds. There's the emergence of larger collectives of peers, as stated, such as populars, brains, jocks. They develop many cultures in ways in which they talk, they behave, and they dress. So kind of thinking this through a little bit, as a child, before a child reaches preschool or whatever, kindergarten, something along those lines, they're more or less spending time with their parents all the time, besides like daycare kind of thing. But as you enter school, now all of a sudden, boom, you're spending a lot of time at school. And not only this, but for now, adolescents are not just going to school, they also want to like hang out and do whatever. They want to go vape at the mall or something. They want to go do the crimes. So now, whatever, they're more mobile, they can walk around, they can take the bus, maybe they're driving, they have a driver's license or something, and, seeking more independence, again, with cultural variation, thus kind of spending less time with their family and more time with their peers. And there are some gender differences, on average, I should say, with girls kind of shifting from kind of alone time with more time, spending more time with friends, and boys, or I should say for boys, kind of replacing that adult time with more alone time, which is rooted in a whole host of like socialization, kind of intimacy with boys or whatever, those kind of gender expectations. But also we see children going from like, small children kind of playing or having friendships to a really small group to more of these larger groups of people, which we'll talk about momentarily, crowds. And the emergence of these mini cultures, of these groups, these populars, these brains, these jocks, they theoretically talk different, they behave different, they have different interests, and they dress differently. And I should also note that the more mobile kind of situation, they're not only just doing the crimes, but also sometimes they'll do more extracurricular activities after school, something along those lines. So not just unmonitored activities, but also monitored activities with other non-parental adults as well. Some causes of these changes. Puberty stimulates adolescents' interest in romantic relationships and distances them from their parents. The cognitive changes of adolescence permit a more sophisticated understanding of social relationships. This allows for the sorting of abstract categorization, which contributes to grouping peers into crowds. Changes in social definition may stimulate changes in peer relationships as a sort of adaptive response. High schools are larger. They're more anonymous social settings. Adolescents seek out individuals who they believe have common interests/values, possibly in an effort to recreate smaller, intimate friendship groups from youth. You don't know where to sit at lunch. You go to your crowd. So kind of the idea here is that maybe puberty kind of stimulating the interest in romantic relationships, thus maybe increasing the likelihood that you're spending less time with your parents and you're more interested in kind of seeking romantic relationships. We'll get there momentarily, but mixed sex kind of groups. But at the same time, you have more advances in cognition, wherein you're more able to think abstractly, as we've talked about in previous chapters. Now you can imagine kind of abstract categories of people and just kind of abstract concepts in general, which allows you to kind of think through these abstract concepts, such as like brains, jocks, whatever. Like in your mind, you have an idea of like, what kind of people, what kind of behaviors, what kind of ways of dressing are associated with those abstract categorizations. And one reason why these kind of groups may form is because, again, structurally, so not just cognition, but again, your social setting, the structure of like society or where you're developing, changes. Now all of a sudden you're in high school. It's in general much larger than elementary schools and middle schools. Often you're surrounded by a ton of people you've never met before. This can be intimidating, obviously. So now you're more anonymous, and thus you kind of like, well, I need to find someone to hang out with. So let me try and find out people who have maybe similar interests as me. And kind of one kind of proposed idea here is that maybe it's in an effort to kind of create those more intimate, smaller groups that you have for childhood. But also, again, that's just a means of social survival. Like, you have to go to lunch, and it's like, oh shit, where do I sit? Like, this is very awkward. Okay, let me find my crowd that I can blend into and have some kind of like social safety. And maybe develop some friendships. But let's begin with cliques before really going into detail about crowds. So adolescent peer groups are organized around two related but different structures. The clique. This is a small, tightly knit group of between 2 and 12 friends, generally the same sex and age. On average, a clique consists of about 5.5 people. It's defined by common activities, such as athletics or studying together, or by friendship. You grew up together in the same neighborhood, or just friends in elementary and middle school. Cliques provide the main social context in which adolescents interact with one another. The small size of the clique allows members to feel they know and appreciate each other more than outsiders. So the clique is kind of your main social arena of socialization. Again, kind of smaller in nature, about 5.5, whatever, 5, 6 people. And the idea of this clique is that you feel like you know each other. There's some level of social friendship, a bonding, a camaraderie between each other. You appreciate, you understand each other, you know each other at higher levels than what you would of an outsider who is outside of your clique. So the clique, again, you know each other well, and it kind of gives you a sense of kind of social connection, a deeper sense of social connection within this social unit, the clique, versus people outside that social unit, the clique. You know them less, thus kind of have a lower kind of social bond with them. This is in contrast to the crowd. Crowds are reputation-based clusters of youth whose function is in part to help solidify young people's social and personal identity. Crowds include jocks, brains, nerds, populars, and druggies. The labels may vary by school, but the groups are fairly commonplace. Membership in a crowd is based mainly on reputation and stereotype, rather than on actual friendship or social interaction. In contrast, cliques rely on shared activities and friendships, and this allows for the development of social skills. You don't need to be smart to be in the brains group. You just need to act/dress like them. The closest friends can belong to different crowds. Changing memberships in a crowd can be very difficult. It's not a place for intimate interaction/friendships. It likely contributes more to the adolescent's sense of identity and self-conception than to their actual social development. So the crowd really is about reputation and stereotypes. And this kind of creates kind of a social and personal identity for an adolescent. So being in the jock group or whatever is associated with a certain social identity, so a certain reputational status, and certain stereotypes of behavior. And it is not, as stated, a place of actual like social intimacy and friendship. It's really just about placing yourself kind of in a social hierarchy, rewarding and kind of discouraging certain lifestyles, and really kind of like funneling yourself into like certain peer groups and away from other peer groups. So not a place of social development and shared activity and friendship. In fact, many adolescents get kind of clumped or sorted into a particular crowd wherein they don't even feel like they belong to that crowd. So they're like, oh, I'm in the brain group. I'm actually like not that smart. Like, why am I in this group? Like, what is going on here? But for whatever reason, whatever stereotype, their reputation, they are sorted into that group. And thus, kind of relatedly, you can have, that small intimate clique group wherein you have a tight kind of more of strong social bonds between like 5 people, but people within that clique group can belong to different crowds. So the same clique with 5 members, all 5 members can literally belong to 5 different crowds. And not only that, you can actually belong to multiple crowds, and some students, or adolescents, I should say, don't belong to any crowds, which can result in kind of like social isolation, other issues. And some of these crowds and members of the crowds are more likely to interact with each other. So you can imagine like brains and nerds or whatever interacting more together than like brains and like the druggies or whatever. Or maybe jocks and populars kind of being less likely to interact with like the unpopulars or something along those lines. Again, because it's really just kind of a sorting mechanism of like reputation. How do these crowds change over time? In early adolescence, activities revolve around same-sex cliques. As romantic interest builds, but before romantic relationships begin, boys and girls cliques come together. This allows to learn more about the other sex without being intimate and embarrassing yourself. Middle adolescence, middle age and mixed age cliques become more prevalent. Peer group eventually is entirely mixed sex cliques. Late adolescence, peer groups begin to disintegrate. Couples begin to split off from the larger groups. As students gain more security, they decline the extent to which they want to improve social skills. Peer groups are replaced by loosely associated sets of couples. Socialization into romantic relationships relies on larger groups which act as a social base. Then they pair off. They pair off, I should say. So kind of as stated before, cliques are typically same-sex, but there is actually racial variation in this. But kind of, again, I'm just broadly stating, we'll break down differences momentarily. Cliques, largely around same-sex, they're same-sex, the members of the clique. They're kind of just chilling with each other, whatever. They're kind of a little younger, early adolescents, 12, 13 years old, whatever, and they're not going out partying yet. They're hanging out with their small kind of group of friends wherein they're developing kind of like a higher intimacy, social bond within that group, practicing social skills. But through time, the romantic interest of these adolescents increase. So as they age, they become more interested in romantic relationships. And what happens is that you basically combine the boys and the girls cliques together. So it kind of allows you to have kind of a base of social security. So like, okay, if I'm like really scared and feeling awkward, I can just drift back to my same-sex clique, and boom, now I'm back in a nice little social setting surrounded by other people who are like me, and I feel more safe. So whatever, you can attend a party and attempt to kind of interact with the other sex, really the other sex cliques, to again practice kind of socialization with the other sex. Now, often what you'll see in like like high schools or even kind of like late middle school, something along those lines, kind of boys and girls kind of standing on the opposite side of the room, kind of just doing that awkward situation wherein they're still kind of a little socially intimidated to kind of be interacting with each other. But actually, what typically happens is that the clique leaders kind of will be the people who are more likely to take the initiative to interact with the other cliques, the other sex cliques, and then thus their little ducklings will follow along with them, and then they start interacting as well. And then eventually, through time, those same-sex cliques become mixed-sex cliques, and those become more prevalent as adolescents age. But not only that, those groups that we talked about, the jocks, brains, whatever, populars, they start to kind of break apart a little bit. So whatever, they often will attend parties with each other, and then all of a sudden they start to break up into couples or smaller like groups, wherein now that crowd has allowed for the opportunity to form romantic relationships. And this is kind of a scene wherein kind of alcohol consumption increases, one, because they're just older, and two, a little less monitoring, a little more partying, and, like three, kind of like, well, that's really sufficient to keep it brief. So kind of the big takeaways here is that we kind of rely on that clique to act as a place of security, and just even kind of our larger groups in general as a place of security, and then from that we kind of take little shots at the opposite sex to kind of form, or the same sex to kind of form intimate relationships with each other. As adolescent age, they become more aware of the crowd structure and where they fall in kind of a hierarchy of the school. Crowd structures becomes more differentiated, more permeable, and less hierarchical, which allows adolescents more freedom to change crowds and enhance their status. More abstract global characteristics versus concrete behavior. They go from normies and losers to a bunch of ways to be a loser. So basically, as adolescents get older, there's a lot more permeability and maneuverability of jumping from crowd to crowd for a whole host of reasons. But kind of the amount of categories also like kind of change. So early adolescence, for example, you're more likely to have very few kind of categories, very few crowds. So like losers and the non-losers, losers, populars, okay? And that's it, you're one or the other. But as you age, you have all these new crowd forms. Again, jocks, druggies, whatever. So now you can be popular or even just normal and be a whole bunch of crowds. So there are a whole bunch of quote-unquote normal crowds, and now there are also new in multiple ways to be in the loser crowd. So you be nerds, brains, burnouts, all these kind of things, and like the cool crowd. You got the jocks, you got the populars, or whatever else is going on in that school. So kind of more differentiation and ways to be a loser or cool, and also at the same time kind of more maneuverability, less hierarchy as you get older. And let's expand on that point a little bit here. By ninth grade, there is near universal agreement among students about their peer groups, about their school's crowd structure, I should say, and the strength of the peer group influence is very high. Both peer pressure and the significance of the crowd structures declines between 9th and 12th grade. A study found that 9th graders were more likely to endorse the idea that exclusion based on crowd was acceptable or more acceptable than 12th graders. A decline is also related to adolescents developing a sense of identity. The crowd allows or serves as a base of self-definition. It's like a badge saying, "This is who I am," before the adolescent has a firm understanding of who they are. Older adolescents may feel that being part of a crowd is stifling or limiting. So kind of the idea here is going back to that, how crowds become a little more less hierarchical and more malleable with time. You can see if you ask, I should say in 9th grade, prior to kind of, a little bit. So basically, we see these crowds become less hierarchical and more malleable as adolescent age. But at 9th grade, you really kind of have like a universal consensus of like, hey, here's the hierarchy of the school. These crowds are like the cool kids, and these kids are like the loser kids. And there's almost like universal kind of agreement of like what crowds are the coolest and like where you fall in like the hierarchy of the school. But as stated, as kind of peer pressure declines, or the impact of peer pressure declines, and kind of that hierarchical approach and that malleability, that hierarchical approach declines and that malleability increases, adolescents will start to endorse at higher levels, hey, we really shouldn't exclude the goths. We shouldn't exclude the nerds from this activity. They come to find that exclusion and that kind of hierarchy as more unacceptable with time. And kind of a few proposed reasons for this is that maybe our adolescents go from using the group as kind of, again, a way to define their identity. So again, relying on the group as a source of identity, and now all of a sudden, okay, the adolescence is like, I have my own identity now. So I use the group as kind of a source of identity, but I've kind of grown out of it. Maybe I'm multiple groups, or maybe I'm just kind of beyond this. I want to not be limited, stifled by kind of the norms and expectations of this specific group, because I understand who I am now. And this is theoretically going on across all adolescents. Thus, kind of that challenging of the crowd's norms and behaviors, ways of dressing, and the social hierarchy kind of contributes to kind of the kind of a breakdown of the group, wherein, again, you can kind of shift between groups, and kind of our willingness to exclude and be not nice people to some groups declines. And by groups, I mean crowds. The social map of adolescence. The social world of adolescents can be classified along two dimensions: how involved they are in institutions controlled by adults, such as school and extracurricular activities, and how involved they are in informal peer culture. Jocks, for example, are involved in peer culture and institutions valued by adults, sports, obviously. Nerds are involved in adult-controlled organizations such as academics. However, they're less involved in peer culture. This is inverse for the party animals, wherein they're highly involved in peer culture, but less involved in adult kind of supervised, controlled activities such as school and extracurricular activities. And then kind of based on that, you can kind of plot that on an X, Y kind of axis and see where people fall, which is to the right-hand side. Crowds act as reference groups, a group against which an individual compares themselves. Crowds act as reference groups and can provide their members with an identity and in the eyes of others. They serve as a structure which defines norms, leisure activities, and tastes and cultures. Adolescents judge one another, or on the basis, I should say, of the company they keep, and they become branded on the basis of the people they hang out with. Crowds serve as a heuristic of who that person is. So we've already kind of reviewed this. Basically, crowds serve as reference group, wherein adolescence is expected to behave in certain ways, to do certain activities. So jocks, whatever, do sports. Gamers, they play games. And particularly like tastes and cultures. Kind of it allows you to have a sense of identity by adopting norms, activities, cultures, ways of dressing. But it also serves as a reference. You can look at someone else by the way they dress, by the way they talk, something along those lines, where they're hanging out, what activities they're doing, and say, oh, that person is in the popular group. That person is in the jock group because they're playing basketball a lot and they wear basketball shorts constantly to school. So knowing kind of what crowd you are in can kind of, or being in a particular crowd is really related to your behaviors and kind of like your values. And because of that, then you can judge people based on said values and behaviors, which are formed from the crowd. So you can say, oh, that crowd is the immoral crowd. That's the crowd you don't want to hang out with. Or, hey, I'm in this crowd, not the greatest crowd, but at least I'm not in that crowd. So kind of a way to kind of define yourself on an individual level, but also kind of rank yourself in the hierarchy of the school. Adolescents often imitate the crowd leaders' behaviors. Adolescents strive to follow the crowd's established social norms. Reinforcement for following a crowd's norms contributes to feeling better about themselves and further incorporating crowd membership into their identity. Adolescents internalize their crowd. It becomes part of their self-concept. If your crowd hates school, even if you do well in school, it is difficult to admit you feel good about it. Specific pressures vary by school. Do drugs and misbehave. Dress in a certain way with expectations of positive feedback. If not, you may change how you dress. Adolescents whose peers identify them as members of low-status crowds develop more positively when they don't see themselves that way. So because of these norms existing, we feel certain social pressures depending on the specific crowd we're a part of. So for example, if we're in a crowd that hates school, or is like, oh, school is lame, boo, 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 tomato, tomato, school. Even if you're awesome at school, that can create some kind of like tension, because it's like, I kind of am really good at school. I'm supposed to hate school. So should I actually be bad at school? Should I like keep it to myself? What do I do with this? So that can, that can be a little stressful at times. But the social pressures can vary. So if you're in the druggy crowd or whatever, the pressure is going to be more likely to do drugs versus like, oh, I'm in the jock group, but my pressure is to, I don't know, spend a lot of time watching football and playing football, something along those lines. And what I mean by reinforcement is like, so then you say, for example, you're in a crowd that dresses a certain way or whatever, has certain social pressures. Well, again, we'll talk about dressing here. And then you dress that way. And then your crowd is like, woo, very nice shoes, cool pants, way to go. Then you feel great about yourself. You feel more positive about yourself. So then you're like, okay, I'm going to keep participating in that particular behavior. So kind of one reason why those crowds can create a homogenous ways of dressing and behavior, because they are socially kind of reinforced and reciprocated among group members. So kind of praising you when you act in ways consistent with the group, or kind of shunning you, or speaking negatively about you when you do not. And interestingly, as I stated before, that as you age, you kind of become aware of where you are in kind of a social hierarchy. And interestingly enough, even, and as I should say that even when you or some adolescents end up kind of being sorted into crowds by other people, even though when they don't believe they belong in that crowd. So like whatever, I'm in the brains group, but I'm like, dude, I'm not that smart. Like, why I'm in this group? But everybody thinks I'm in this group. What is going on? Or this crowd, I should say. What is going on? This is weird. Well, if you end up getting sorted by others into a particular crowd, and that's like really low in social standing, that can be harmful. But interestingly enough, which is this final bullet point, is that adolescents who are part of adolescents whose peers say they're part of that crowd who has low social standings, if that adolescent is like, wait a second, I'm not actually in this crowd. I'm not like these other losers in this crowd. I'm different. I shouldn't belong to this crowd. My peers are just making a mistake, whatever. Those people, those adolescents develop more positively, because basically what they're doing is they're separating themselves from the crowd that their peers are forcing them or categorizing them into. Ethnicity and crowd membership. Evidence indicates that adolescents in multi-ethnic schools first divide among ethnic lines, then form the more familiar adolescent crowds within ethnic groups. Adolescents from one ethnic group are less likely to see crowd distinctions within other ethnic groups than within their own. So white U.S. adolescents, for example, may conceptualize a Chinese group as quote-unquote the Asian group, but the Chinese group itself divides that group into nerds, populars, burnouts, just like any other set of groups. The meaning of groups or crowds associated with belonging to different crowds may differ across ethnic and social economic groups. Regardless of race, nerds are more likely to be picked on for doing well in school. However, values associated with being in one school as opposed to another vary from school to school. For example, might be more valuable to be a jock in some school contexts than others. All right, so kind of breaking this down here. This is a kind of a classic understanding of like social psychology, wherein the groups that you belong to, you're always more likely to see all the distinctions, all the shades of gray than a group that you don't belong to. So basically you have an understanding, a higher understanding of your in-group than your out-group. And you can see this, not just race, but all kinds of people. So say you're like in the band and you're like, oh, people who aren't in the band are like, oh, all those band people, they're the same. But if you're in the band group, you're like, oh no, the drummers, they're so different than whatever, the trumpet players, they're completely different people. So you have all these distinctions, like once you're in that group, you kind of, you see distinctions within it. But if you're outside that group, you kind of clump it all together. You can also see this in ethnic lines as well, wherein, for example, white U.S. adolescents, so again, they just say, oh, that's the Asian group. Wherein people in that group, the Chinese group, for example, are like, no, see, those people within our same ethnicity, they're the nerds. And those other people within our same ethnicity, those are the popular kids. So you can see in-group, again, having far more understanding of the shades of gray versus out-group members. And one other thing I want to touch on here is that final bullet point, wherein like the social value associated with one crowd can vary across contexts to some regard. So for example, jocks, not at the same level of popularity across schools. There is variation in kind of like this social hierarchy across schools. So for a whole host of reasons, you know, whatever, maybe you go to a nerd school and you're like, woo, what matters is like learning or something along those lines. So maybe that influences or declines like the social influence of the jock, or hell, maybe your sports teams just like suck. So it's like, I don't want to be part of that group that's just like really bad at sports. But there can be a whole lot of reasons. But the point is that the social standing of crowds can vary across context. But unfortunately, the nerds do get picked on, typically more for doing well in school across race and kind of context in general. So as already stated with this age segregation point, what cliques appear to form an age similarity, and there's age segregation in cliques, largely due to the structure of schools. You literally just have less opportunities to interact with younger peers or older peers, and this is, again, an example of how literally structure impacts developmental outcomes. So you can imagine, like, hey, let's have a class school wherein we mix up all the 9th graders and 12th graders into a single class. Well, they're probably going to be far more likely to form groups that are less age segregated. And one kind of other example of this is adolescents' online friends tend to be less similar in age. Again, kind of in online, you have more opportunities to talk with older or younger peers, and thus kind of that structural barrier of age segregation by classroom, by lunchtime, having different lunch times, even having, whatever, middle school versus high school, having different class schedules or school schedules. When school begins, school ends at the end of the day. Those things are no longer relevant because you're all of a sudden online. And then you can just post to anybody you want. You can just never log off and have all kinds of different friends and different age groups. Sex segregation. It begins in childhood and continues through most of adolescence. However, it weakens as you age. Racial differences, however. This sex segregation effect is stronger in U.S. white adolescents than U.S. black adolescents. It is due partly to early shared activities and interests, and these shifts in time. Proportion of other sex friends doubles between 6th and 10th grade. Sex segregation also results from concerns about behaving in sex-appropriate ways. So, for example, boys don't play with dolls, girls don't wrestle. However, there are differences in social repercussions associated with behaving in quote-unquote sex-inappropriate ways. So, for example, there's a term called tomboys, aka girls who act in stereotypically gender stereotypical ways. Versus, there's really no term for tom girl. That really doesn't exist for a boy who acts in quote unquote feminine ways. That kind of social understanding is different between boys and girls. It makes it difficult for boys to be part of a girl clique. Because, you get insulted, you can get insulted. You're like, oh, why are you hanging out with the girls? You're not masculine kind of thing. Versus, yes, it still exists among the girls, but there is at least some kind of a social model wherein we understand that, okay, some girls do act like quote unquote boys. Again, gender stereotypes here. Gay men adolescents typically have more other sex friendships than same-sex friendships. And there still needs to be a ton more research about trans adolescents. Obviously, all of this can be different for trans, and maybe when they start working through gender-affirming care and all these other things. This is very much a very, very, very kind of new field, and maybe a potential project idea for you. Once dating becomes the norm, it flips. Those lacking relationships with peers of the other sex are objects of suspicions and social rejection. So basically go from, oh, boys hanging out with girls, what is wrong with you? This is sus. And then, like 4 years later, like, oh, boys only hanging out with boys? That's sus. So all of a sudden, the norms have shifts, and now all of a sudden it is now cool to hang out with the boys to hang out with girls. But again, you can see different racial differences here. You can see differences in potential. We don't have a great amount of research in cis and transgendered adolescents, and we can see differences in gay adolescents as well. So again, definitely variation here, but kind of just broadly stated. Ethnic segregation. Ethnicity is not a strong determinant of clique composition in childhood. By adolescence, however, it is a stronger predictor. However, there have been historical shifts. Adolescents are more likely to have friends of the same ethnicity from a different social class than friends from the same social class but different ethnic group. A little less common in desegregated schools. This can help protect against discrimination and can increase ethnic pride. Black students report increased levels of discrimination against them by other students as they age. Immigrants are less likely to have cross-ethnic friendships, more likely to have friendship with immigrants from the same backgrounds who agree on the importance of cultural identity. Overall, in settings of discrimination, same ethnic groups are more likely to emerge. Studies have found that adolescents who have strong friendships with peers from other backgrounds are more likely to have positive attitudes towards people from other backgrounds. Contact with different ethnic groups as a child predicts contact with ethnic groups as an adult. They're more likely to develop when cross-group peers have opportunities to do activities together outside of school. This is the importance of community. So a couple aspects we want to talk through here. Discrimination increases on average as adolescents age. And thus kind of this ethnic groups can serve as a protective factor, wherein you can rely on each other, you're going kind of through similar struggles, and thus can kind of like share and kind of those kind of struggles together, and thus kind of have like an emotional outlet. At the same time, kind of increase ethnic pride, which can help protect against some of those impacts of discrimination. At the same time, we can see differences in kind of immigrants and how immigrants form friendships in kind of high school settings. Typically, immigrants are more likely to form friendships with other immigrants, not just from the same background, but who shares similar cultural values and similar levels of acculturation. So maybe parents who are more resistant to be quote unquote like Americanized or whatever, something along those lines. So those children of those types of parents are more kind of likely to group together because again, they have same kind of like not just backgrounds, but kind of cultural values as well. And then finally, that final point, wherein adolescents who have strong friendships with adolescents from other ethnic groups, they're more likely to have positive attitudes towards that ethnic group in the future and continue to form friendships with other ethnic groups in other ethnicities from themselves as they get older. So kind of consistent with other developmental outcomes wherein it's a continuation process. So forming those kind of strong friendships across racial backgrounds increases the likelihood that you do so in the future and have a more positive evaluation of said whatever other racial group. And this can also happen at the community level. So whatever, some kind of community activity wherein adolescents of different races like coming together to whatever, do some kind of activity or whatever, service or volunteer, whatever, something along those lines. This can be challenging though because of like segregation in communities. So kind of though you can see kind of bleeding into like historical impacts of like redlining and all these things contributing to segregation in schools and kind of decreased opportunities for kind of interracial community activities. But to the extent that they do exist, they have been found to be positively beneficial to adolescent development. There are three factors that are important to determining clique membership. That is the orientation towards school, or orientation towards teen culture, and involvement in antisocial activity. Let's break those down in more detail, beginning with orientation towards school. Adolescents and their friends tend to be similar in their attitudes towards school, school achievement, course selection, and educational plans. How much time students devote to schoolwork affects their involvement in other activities. Parents who stress achievement put pressure on teens to spend time with peers who are equally committed to academic achievement. Schools assign students to track based on their academic achievement. This is called like track-based learning, potentially harmful. Students who also influence each other's academic performance. Girls are more likely to take advanced math courses if their peers do. All things being equal, if you have friends who do better at school, you are more likely to do better at school. So kind of here we have like a cliques, and again this is more intimate setting, more friendship, more strong social bonds. So within your clique, if you have people part of your clique who are kind of committed to doing well in school and have kind of like long-term college plans, something along those lines, all members of a group are likely kind of to share kind of similar ideas about that forward thinking, about academics and kind of their immediate commitment to academic achievement. And this is for a whole host of reasons. So for example, if you're committed to academic achievement in high school, you're probably less likely to go out to random parties and stuff. Not saying that you don't, but literally you just have less time to do so because you have to spend more time studying and stuff like that. But at the same time, you also have a parental effect wherein your parents are kind of stressing to you, hey, hang out with this kid more because this person is committed to academic achievement as well. And their parents are also like talking to each other, and they're both kind of pressuring you to, you know, be friends or whatever. And interestingly, you can also see this among girls, for example. You know, we all understand like the classic gender stereotype, oh, girls can't do math or whatever. However, to kind of combat that stereotype threat, if girls have kind of peers who are taking more advanced, challenging math classes, other girls in that clique are more likely to do so as well. So kind of, again, kind of social support an influence of one's peers, striving for academic achievement, influencing other members of that clique. And one potential issue with kind of this tracking situation is that schools will often take the worst performing students and put them all together in a single classroom. AKA, you're going to be surrounded with peers who are also very much struggling with education, maybe have underdeveloped social skills, and thus you're kind of maybe having these peers kind of mutually reinforcing, socially kind of reciprocating these kind of negative attitudes towards school and kind of low school achievement, and thus maybe accidentally reinforcing those behaviors rather than kind of like addressing them. Moving on to antisocial activity. Antisocial aggressive adolescents gravitate towards each other and form deviant peer groups. They have friends, but more likely to engage in deviant behavior. Adolescents with deviant friends report being less lonely than adolescents without friends. Adaptations can have positive and negative outcomes. Study found that if an adolescent peer group engages in violence, the adolescent is far more likely to engage in the same behavior. Gangs. Gangs are defined as organized peer groups of antisocial individuals. They have identifiable names and common symbols, such as colors, tattoos, and hand symbols. Gang members, both male and female, are at a greater risk for many types of problems, such as antisocial behavior, psychological distress, exposure to violence, and victimization. They tend to be more isolated from their family, have more emotional and behavioral problems, and have poor self-conceptions than other adolescents. So antisocial antisocial adolescents gravitate towards each other, just like any kind of other group. And this again can be due to kind of low social skills, maybe similar backgrounds. So whatever, they come together to form a group. And once in that group, they're more likely to engage in kind of antisocial activity. Now, interestingly, as stated, adolescents with antisocial friends are more likely to report being less lonely than adolescents without friends. So basically, it becomes like, okay, I could be very, very lonely and have nobody in my life, or I should say, join this antisocial group, which maybe I don't agree with everything that's going on, but we're all kind of reinforcing each other's behavior, and all of a sudden, okay, now we're doing the antisocial behaviors. But this is kind of just a classic example of when people think of adaptation, it doesn't mean like positive at all times. Not every outcome is positive. And adaptation is just like a survival mechanism. It's one pathway forward. So yes, you are decreasing your loneliness, but at the same time increasing your risk of committing antisocial behaviors. And that's just that's how adaptation works. And kind of moving on to gangs, and here we have more of this is more of an organized group with various tattoos, just symbols, kind of demonstrating their kind of commitment to the gang. And gang members tend to be isolated from their family, their communities. They have various behavioral issues, have emotional issues, more likely to have kind of disorders. They have kind of poor self-conception, poor self-evaluations of themselves. So kind of like obviously not well off adolescents kind of coming together and into like to such a butt in kind of an extreme antisocial form. And often done, again, as kind of a survival mechanism. It's an adaptation. Not the best adaptation, but at times it could, to an adolescent, be like, hey, this is my only option. I have to have something. We are mammals. We are social creatures. Also, like there are things in my life that are challenging. I got to have peers. So, hey, let's join this gang. I have some level of like camaraderie. Let's go. And that happens. That is one form of adaptation, especially in very challenging circumstances. There are differences between crews and gangs. Crews are less likely to engage in serious violence, but more likely to engage in other deviant behavior. Adolescents loosely affiliated with gangs are often incorrectly charged as gang members. So kind of the idea here is there's some kind of not a sub-variation, but kind of similar idea, crews, wherein yes, they're engaging in antisocial behavior, but not at the same levels of violence as gangs do. So although crews may engage in antisocial behavior, not like murder, for example, at the same rates as a gang would. Gang members typically have a history of chronic exposure to trauma, such as domestic abuse, violence, neglect, drug abuse in their household, the community. Gangs are interpreted as a survival mechanism, as I stated, a collective in the absence of support. I am tired of being afraid and I wanted to be around. It is hard making new friends. There are worries everywhere. Antisocial behaviors begin forming at the home/community. Coercive relationships with the community and your family contributes to the development of negative social skills. Antisocial adolescents are then more likely to do poorly in school and be rejected by peers. Who is left is other antisocial adolescents who reward each other's behaviors. So again, gang members, these people ain't thriving. These are harsh circumstances, exposed to a lot of trauma, a lot of violence in their life, not like super nurtured. Guess what? Their parents probably also exposed to a shit ton of trauma. Their neighborhoods, rough. This happens. So again, a survival mechanism. And those quotes are from gang members who were adolescents. So you can see here, listen, I'm afraid, I want to live, I can't make friends, aka I'm lonely, I'm socially isolated, I have worries around me. There's really no mechanism for like immediate change, especially like an individual level, like you're constrained by the world around you that you did not create. So what do you have to do? You have to survive, you have to adapt. This is one form that you can do so. So when this combination of like trauma, poor neighborhoods, underinvestment for a whole host of social and historical, economic reasons, political reasons, these individuals kind of have a negative course of relationships in their household and their community. They then bring that to school. Then they can't really interact well with other peers, and thus they're kind of socially rejected. And then guess what happens? Collections of kind of rejected, low social skills, heavily traumatized adolescents are left, and they come together, and then all of a sudden they are reciprocating their behavior, and then boom, you kind of get this collection of very kind of extreme antisocial behaviors. And this is just an example here you can look over. Common interests among friends. Parents play a role in socializing certain traits in their children. They act as consultants, helping adolescents work out problems. Parent-child relationships contribute to the development of dispositions in the child. Parents socialize certain traits, which impact the selection of friends/crowds. Families have a strong influence on who the child picks as peers. These peers, in return, support their behaviors. Parents manage adolescent friendships by monitoring the individuals their child spends time with, but excessive control can backfire. This can drive adolescents into becoming closer with peers. Even when adolescents have relatively more antisocial friends, having better relationships at home and a stronger attachment to school makes adolescents less susceptible to friends' negative influence, even in gangs. Iatrogenic effects, unintended adverse consequences of treatment or intervention. Group interventions can put antisocial adolescents together who then teach each other other ways to engage in antisocial behavior. So kind of the idea here is that this is not just like an adolescent just making decisions on their own, but also parents play a role, shockingly, I know. For example, parents socialize certain traits in the child. So levels of aggression, levels of pro-social behavior, and certain kind of like values as well. And that influences the type of crowds and friends that or cliques, I should say, friends, crowd, and even crowds, that the adolescent ends up picking as their peers. And then once they do so whatever, say I'm stressing like very pro-social, altruistic, or like educational values to a child, the child will theoretically, or slash the adolescent, will pick adolescents who have similar kind of values, and then those adolescents together will again kind of reciprocally influence each other to kind of reinforce those values. And one way to kind of managing, also another way I should say to manage those friendships is by monitoring the time and the people that your child spends time with, kind of matters. But kind of being overly obsessive monitoring can backfire. So that can like kind of drive the adolescent away from their parents, which is really just kind of getting at kind of those negative relationships you at home, community, wherever can, like everything in development, spill over into other developmental domains. In this case, the acquisition of certain peers within a school setting. And even in among adolescents who belong to gangs or have antisocial friends, having kind of that strong commitment to school or strong belonging to school or a strong relationship with their parents can kind of decrease the most negative impacts of belonging to a gang or antisocial or having antisocial peers, because you have kind of alternative sources of social support, so you don't only have to rely on your antisocial peer to give you that sense of like human connection. You have other bases of social support that are still supporting you. A sense of belonging that is pro-social. And kind of like I said before, with kind of that tracking situation where you take like the worst students, or the most underperforming students, the most behaviorally mischievous students, and put them all in the same classroom, and that could just like, again, kind of, they are socially reciprocating each other, and thus increasing the likelihood that they're going to keep doing those same behaviors. This kind of idea here is like, okay, we're going to put antisocial peers together in some kind of intervention or something along those lines. Well, some unintended consequences can be like, oh, you're again putting antisocial peers together. You're putting them in groups, and now again, all they're interacting with is other antisocial peers, and all of a sudden they're teaching each other new ways to be antisocial or get around the intervention or the treatment. So it's something that treatments and interventions, programs have to be mindful of. Jumping ahead to stability of adolescent friendships, cliques show only moderate stability over the course of a school year, although they are more stable later in school. Typically, the characteristics of the clique relatively is stable, but people move in and out. Only about 1/3 of students who name a best friend in the fall of a school year rename the same person as their best friend in the spring. Well-adjusted adolescents have more stability in friendships than antisocial adolescents. Boys' friendships tend to be more stable. More common causes of broken friendships are jealousy, incompatibility, betrayal, and aggression. Friendships are more likely to end in between 7th and 8th grade than between 11th and 12th grade while in schools. Higher the number, the more probable friendships break up. So all we're getting at here is that as adolescent age, they become more stable in their friendship groups. So as stated before, only about 1/3 of students in around like 7th, 8th grade will report that they have the same best friend in the fall as they did in the at the end of the school year. However, kind of as you get older, and also as you're kind of the more well-adjusted adolescents, they have more stability in their friendships. Again, so you have the well-adjusted adolescents having more stability, and as you get older, more stability in your friendships. And you can see this on the right-hand side, with basically the higher the number on that probability y-axis, the higher likelihood you are to see your friendships break up by the end of the year. Determinants of popularity and rejection. Popular adolescents are more socially skilled than unpopular peers. There's a lot of variability among popular teenagers and other characteristics. It can make it very difficult to predict who actually becomes popular during adolescence. There are two forms of proposed popularity. First, sociometric popularity, that is how well liked an individual is. And perceived popularity, which is how much status or prestige an individual has. Preppy students can be high in perceived popularity, but low in sociometric popularity. Brains, on the other hand, who are nice, could be described as high in sociometric popularity, but low in perceived popularity. Predicting perceived popularity is further complicated by the fact that peer norms change, and socially competent adolescents are skilled at figuring them out, adjusting their behavior in response to them, and even influencing them. So around the time when you're in 8th, 9th grade, adolescents tend to understand the differences between sociometric popularity and perceived popularity. So again, just how well you're liked by others, and then versus like how much prestige, what is your status at the school. And again, you can see this in different groups, wherein like kind of the brainy kind of people can be like, oh yeah, that's a really nice person. But at the same time, really not having that same prestige as like a preppy or like a jock or something along those lines. And as stated before, the popular peers in general tend to be more socially skilled. So as norms are changing within a high school setting or kind of even late middle school and just norms in society, kind of the adolescents with high levels of perceived popularity are able to kind of like read those kind of shifts in the norms of a school setting and then kind of adapt themselves to that. They can adjust their response. They can, I should say, adjust their behaviors in response to shifting norms, and also at the same time, it's kind of like shape them a little bit. So create new norms and set that kind of tone for the school setting, which again, they're able to, in that case, through kind of the high levels of social skills, dictate or at the same time, adapt to ones. Again, it's kind of like that's that high level of social skills, allowing them for high levels of adaptation and creation. Sociometric popularity is associated with some social skills as well, but these people in high sociometric popularity is often described as funny and friendly. Perceived popularity is much more variable, aka there's a lot of variability, a lot of differences. It differs between schools and groups, and it differs between race. So for example, US Black adolescents are less likely to see drinking as associated with status than US white adolescents do. Some things that lead to popularity also lead to an adolescent becoming more likable, such as being hot and having high levels of social skills, while things that help maintain popularity may make an adolescent less likable, such as gossip and manipulation. High status peers heavily influence what is popular. Thus, it's difficult to predict who will emerge with what type of popularity. So perceived popularity can be kind of difficult to kind of predict because, as stated before, they're very good at social skills and norms change. So all of a sudden, woo, it's super cool to vape, and now all of a sudden they're vaping and they are able to maintain that perceived popularity. And now all of a sudden other peers will start vaping because they're like, oh, the most perceived popular kids are doing it. Woo, now I'm going to do that to kind of get that social capital, that prestige within my school setting. But it doesn't have to only be negative. People with high perceived popularity who engage in like pro-social activities are more likely to kind of influence pro-social activities within lower levels of perceived popularity adolescents. Now, interestingly, popularity kind of is twofold, wherein kind of you have like this high level of social skills or like physical attraction, which can make you more popular. But at the same time, to like maintain your place in that hierarchy of popularity, you have to rely on stuff like manipulation, gossiping, or maybe physical violence as well, to maintain that popularity. So at the same time, so you're gossiping, you're manipulating people socially to maintain your perceived popularity, but at the same time, seeing kind of a decline in your sociometric popularity. So kind of that delicate balance of how much gossip you should do, how much manipulation you should do, how well, again, you are adapting to these kind of norms, and then you changing the norms in school. All of these kind of things contribute to the likelihood of popularity. And interestingly, less popular, less perceived popular adolescents will often like kind of have a complete misunderstanding of the perceived popular adolescent. So they'll be like, oh, actually, that person, that super popular person, is vaping 24/7. They vape. They're vape nation. But in reality, they're vaping once a month or something like that. So kind of the perceived understanding of the lower kind of popular kids also kind of impacts not just it can impact their behavior and theoretically the popularity of the perceived popular kids. Aggression. Some aggressive teenagers are quite popular. For example, some popular boys are extremely aggressive, athletically competent, and average or below average in friendliness, academic competence, and shyness. Some popular girls are antisocial and anti-academic and sometimes bullies. Two types of aggression: proactive, which is aggressive behavior that is deliberate and planned, and reactive aggression, which is aggressive behavior that is unplanned and impulsive. Different types of aggression are associated with increased popularity, while others are associated with decreased popularity. Adolescents can have a hard time of predicting if something will make them popular. Not just aggression, but difficulty controlling emotions / lack of social skills. A study of adolescents whose early popularity came from impressing peers with delinquent behavior had more interpersonal and behavioral problems as young adults. So aggression can be useful. Again, going back to gossiping, social manipulation can be useful to maintain kind of your source of popularity. But there are kind of two different forms of aggression. One looking at proactive aggression, wherein this is deliberate, it's planned. I'm going to launch a smear campaign against someone who's wronged me to maintain my popularity. Versus more reactive aggression, which unplanned, impulsive. This can be more related to lack of social skills and kind of lack of like regulation and behavior. So all of a sudden you're just like punching your peers and stuff. That's not going to really make you like popular. You're just out of control, screaming at people, punching people. That kind of reactive, not planned aggression, typically associated with a decrease in popularity. And interestingly, as stated, it's very difficult for adolescents to understand, hey, is this behavior going to make me popular? Because you have to like think through like, oh, what do other people, how will other people react to this? And that could be quite difficult because even researchers have a hard time to understanding who's going to be popular and not popular, let alone like adolescents in real time in this complex new scenario for, thus they can make incorrect decisions and accidentally try to partake in a behavior that increases their popularity, but whoops, I've just ruined my popularity. But, and then a couple of other caveats, but for both boys and girls, just over-aggression is generally associated with like a decline in romantic relationships for kind of like self-evident reasons, more like argumentative, even if it's non-physical aggression, but like super non-argumentative, manipulation, gossip, not strong foundations of like intimacy. And also kind of behaviors that are typically associated, or whatever I should say, aggression does not have the same impact on popularity across cultures. Some studies have found that pro-social values are more likely to result in popularity in some collectivist countries like China. So again, cultural variation here. So dynamics of popularity, the quote-unquote too popular adolescents face the possibility of being the objects of other classmates' meanness. Meanness acts as a disciplinary mechanism to make sure no one member gets too stuck up. Both students who are very high in popularity and very low report less satisfaction in social life and more likely to be victims of relationship aggression. Popular adolescents are more likely to have close and intimate friendships, have an active social life, take part in extracurricular activities, and receive more social recognitions. Teenagers whose peers like them, or who merely believe that their peers like them, have higher self-esteem, both as adolescents and as adults. Having friends/community outside school can buffer/protect the harmful consequences of having few friends in the school. So kind of the too popular point is kind of the idea that, hey, you're too popular, dude. You think you're running too much of this school. Chill out. So in order to kind of get that person back down to reality a little bit, according to the peers, they're going to be mean to them. So they're going to be like, this is kind of a mechanism by which you bring that person back down to reality. You're not stuck up and you're back with the rest of us. So so even if you're in a popular group, you don't want to go too popular, or now you're the object of resentment towards the rest of the people in the popular group. So thus, interestingly, even if you're very, I should say that students who are both very high in popularity and very low report generally similar levels or less satisfaction in their social lives, and are more likely to be victims of relational aggression. So on the one hand, if you're low on popularity, you're going to get more aggression because you're just getting picked on. But if you're too high, people are like, yo, bring your ass back down to earth, get your ego in check. I'm going to now commit aggression against you, and that's not going to make you feel good, and thus lower levels of life satisfaction. And then kind of the poser point thing is that adolescents in general can understand, oh, this person is being someone that they're like really not. Granted, they kind of all are, but if it's like glaringly obvious that they're not, outside the norms of faking it who you are, those peers, those posers, wannabes are more likely to face social rejection. And then kind of the idea here is that if you have issues at the school, not super popular, having friends outside the school in the community can help protect against the most negative impacts of having few friends at school. Let's jump to relational aggression. Most studies of aggressive children have paid more attention to boys. Boys are more overtly aggressive than girls, but girls are more likely to engage in relational aggressions. Relational aggression acts intended to harm another through the manipulation of relationship with others. such as malicious gossip. There's a correlation. Victims of relational aggressions are at a higher risk of being a victim of physical aggression. Relational aggression was first found in girls, but boys also use relational aggression. There's more attention has been devoted to physical fighting, though relational aggression also causes suffering. Girls tend to be more aware of relational aggression, more distressed by it, and victims of it. Those who use it are often more popular as long as they don't overkill. The point of using it is to maintain a status/popularity. Social skills that increase chance of being popular, such as humor, reading people, is also useful for rumors/gossip. So we have this kind of idea with aggression, historically really associated with boys for kind of self-evident reasons like physical aggression, which is obviously problematic. But girls also engage in physical aggression, but also at higher likelihood to engage in relational aggression, which also can have negative impacts. And this, again, as stated, really kind of manipulating your relationship with others through things like gossip, aka, insert all those mean girl memes, whatever here. And this is kind of done not just to harm other people, but really kind of can be used to maintain status and popularity, as I stated before. So kind of spreading rumors about someone else who's maybe threatening your kind of social hierarchy standing can be useful. So some of those social skills that are involved with like reading people, understanding kind of social trends in the school, humor, those things, can be good, but also negatively can contribute to a higher likelihood of relational aggression, because those kind of same reading people, humor, understanding of social dynamics are also useful when creating rumors and gossip to harm other people. Now, interesting, although we have kind of differences between relational aggression and physical aggression, people, both boys and girls, who are victims of relational aggression are at a higher risk of also being victims of physical aggression. Let's talk about some of the consequences of social rejection. Being unpopular has negative consequences for adolescents' mental health and psychological development. It increases the risk of alcohol use, for example, and increases the risk of academic difficulties. What makes aggressive adolescents face rejection? Poor self-control also is associated with later problematic behaviors. Many unpopular aggressive children display hostile attribution bias. This is defined as the tendency to interpret ambiguous interactions with others as deliberately hostile. Unpopular withdrawn children generally display hesitancy, low self-esteem, and a lack of confidence that makes other children feel uncomfortable, and their submissiveness makes them targets for bullying. They're more likely to merge if the rejected believes they, rather than the peers who rejected them, are the ones at fault. So basically what we're getting at there is how the person who is bullied can have differences in their developmental outcomes. So if the person who's bullied blames himself, they're more likely to have negative developmental outcomes versus the bullied saying, that person is at fault. This is a bad person who's engaging in this bullying. Those people, those adolescents who kind of have that cognitive evaluation are more likely to emerge developmentally with less harm or minimum harm attached to them. And as I stated before, kind of that reactive aggression is really associated with kind of negative developmental outcomes and kind of less positive peer relationships and less popularity in adolescence. Partly because it's really one predictor of that is kind of lower levels of self-control. And this lower levels of self-control can also impact, is also associated with future problematic behaviors. So really it's kind of like that foundation of kind of poor self-regulation, poor self-control, contributing to higher levels of aggression, physical aggression, kind of that reactive aggression, and not just as an adolescent, but as an adult as well. And moreover, kind of these unpopular, poor self-control adolescents are more likely to have this hostile attribution bias, wherein, like, basically, while communicating in the world, they'll interpret scenarios that really aren't aggressive at all as, like, super aggressive and threatening to them. Thus, they will, because they are sensing that threat, they will then behave aggressively back to their peer, and their peer is like, what the hell is going on right now? I do not want to be around this person, and then thus that aggressive person loses social contacts, and again, can start a downward cycle wherein they eventually find themselves surrounded by other, and exclusively only other antisocial peers, or aggressive peers with poor self-control. And I want to wrap up and jump ahead to cyberbullying. This is kind of a hot topic a few years ago, and a little less so now, but still exists. This is bullying that occurs over the internet or via cell phones. Less common than in-person harassment. It becomes more common during adolescence. Most is not anonymous. It's directed at friends/schoolmates. It's associated with both emotional and behavioral problems. Girls can use it to spread gossip, while boys can more directly just insult others, but both gossip and direct insults are present in both boys and girls. Used as an instrument to increase social standing and can increase popularity. Types of bullying are correlated. Victims and perpetrators of cyberbullying tend to have the most adverse backgrounds. Victims of traditional bullying are also bullied online. Perpetrators of traditional bullying also engage in cyberbullying. So our big key points here is that there is a big correlation between people who are bullied in school and people who are cyberbullying, and also people who bully in person and bully online. So it's not really necessarily that these are all kind of distinct populations, but rather an extension of bullying outside school hours, which again, a product of kind of the historical era we lived in. Now we have the internet, social media, smartphones that were on 24/7. Way to go. And now, because of that, you can now bully people 24/7 from the comfort of your own home. Both bullies, I should say, and the bullied tend to have higher levels of adversity in their lives. So they tend to have kind of more adverse child events. So again, kind of like everything, ACEs generally associated with negative outcomes. So with that said, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week. Thanks, everyone. Bye.